Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Leverage Redemption. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So at the core of this episode is a buddy of Elliot's named Paul, who they knew each other from I think military stuff in the past. Ended up dying, and obviously it seems like it's an accident, but Elliot finds out from a guy named Mitchell who worked with him, being like, no, this guy Kurtlander ended up killing him, because Elliot had met up with Paul 4 years prior, and it was he was putting together this clinic, and Kurtlander ended up funding it and stuff like that. And now it seems like there was actually a lot more going on in the background that Paul didn't really, because I think for Elliot, it's right, you're my friend, my buddy, we have such a deep history. The fact is, you could have come to me probably even before we find out later on that I was wondering if that was going to be the twist or not, whether or not Paul was actually going to be alive. I thought that was kind of neat though, but I thought at the very least, I feel like Elliot probably would have felt in general, hey, come to me if you're in any trouble, if this guy's giving you any problems, you could have come to me. But also the fact is, he didn't tell Elliot the truth. Obviously we find out that Kurtlander, and I guess it comes as no surprise because the man keeps telling the same story over and over throughout the episode. I mean, even at one point, it's he's like, well, they asked, because he gets called out by it, the second time he's telling the story in the episode. The first time was in front of maybe Senate or something like that, and then the second time is in front of everyone at that Orpheus Grove place. And then the guy was like, no, I didn't actually ask you about that. I asked you if when you were going to blow the horn or whatever. So it's he was using every opportunity, and you're just oh God, it's almost basically the military equivalency of Al Bundy of I scored 4 touchdowns in a single game one time way back in the day in high school. It's got that same energy about it. You're just because he's trying to flex and he's trying so hard. And I do like how that ties into a thing that Elliot said in this episode, where he was basically right, people who kind of push that forward and just kind of talk about their exploits and stuff like that, who brag about it, those are the people who are just kind of they're overcompensating, And for him, it's when he's talking, because Harry's I don't think I'm really good when it comes to the whole pain situation. So, but it's I don't know if you're a hero, Harry, but I definitely know you're not a coward, because he's seen cowards before, and he knows them. And I thought that was a really sweet thing to tell Harry. That is, right, you don't have to overcompensate. I don't know if you're going to be a hero, but I've seen you, and you're not a coward. I mean, having done what he's done, I think especially from Elliot's point of view, because it's right, especially because Harry kind of confronted a lot of his past last season, obviously, going toe-to-toe with who he was and the work that he did and the people he represented. That takes courage. That's not the easy thing. That's the hard road, so I think that kind of plays into that role, too. But yeah, they were trying to get close to Kurtlander to kind of, because he's part of this Silver Guard. It's basically a company that, what is it, a private security company that basically the government rents out to kind of do some very shady stuff. So the whole thing is to try and bring this all down, obviously getting revenge for Paul. So, and ultimately their original plan didn't go the way they wanted to, because they ended up having to go after Kurtlander at this Orpheus Grove, which I love that whole, love as in, man, it shows you just how much of a dick Kurtlander is, that the fact is Sophie was oh, I got hit by a car, and he legitimately didn't care. He's come on, let's go. He reminds me of that guy from the original series that they went after. He's a guy, they had to do a similar thing where, hey, this guy, he made a business by basically destroying people's reputations and stuff like that. They had to bring him into the spotlight. They had to make him a hero, build his star up so much, and then make him come crumbling down. That's kind of the whole job. It kind of reminded me of that, because they would constantly try to put him in a situation to be kind of a hero. It's not a one-to-one, but there's certain parallels to that, and his immediate Kurtlander being yeah, let's go ignore that lady who got hit by a car. It's yeah, bastard didn't even hesitate. It was just kind of we gotta go. So shows you where his priorities are, that he doesn't even put up the front of being a decent person. So I thought that was just fascinating. It just kind of reminded me, because like every attempt that the team tried to, like the other guy from the original series that they were trying to like make a hero, every time they turn around to try and make him do something heroic, he'd avoid it like the plague. You know, it ended up being harder than they thought. So I think there's just kind of an interesting parallel between those episodes, in that the whole kind of fake heroism element of it. I am curious how Parker knows about like the Orpheus Grove, because it's like, is she a conspiracy person, or is that something she kind of picked up from Hardison? I mean, because I guess it's like when it's a conspiracy related to something that she's really interested in, because she was like, yeah, like it's a conspiracy theory that she's kind of spawned her own conspiracy theories off of. But basically it's like, yeah, it's something that goes like from way back in the day, that thing's been around for like 140 years. It's like a gathering of the rich and powerful, to kind of get together and do their thing. It came off a little cultish. If you've seen Harley Quinn season 3, it definitely gave me the Court of Owls vibes. If you've seen Harley Quinn, I'll leave it at that without spoiling. But if you've seen, it kind of gave me those vibes. It wasn't going to go as far as the Court of Owls, but I almost thought they'd go somewhere, not all that way that went, but like partially the way there. That's why I was like, oh, a whole bunch of dudes around. I'm like, and are you wearing anything under that? I was like, is it going to lead to like a, I thought at one point, I'm like, they're not going to like make this like a nudist thing where like those guys are going to walk around naked. I was like, that'd be super inappropriate and weird. I legitimately got those vibes, because it came off, like I said, like the Court of Owls and Harley Quinn, kind of that weird cultish vibe it had going on. And even Sophie, when they were doing the whole thing of like, they had their hands up, making those noises, she's like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So, but obviously the thing that jumped out to Parker the most is like, hey, the uncrackable safe. It's like, well, it's understandable why. It's a safe that's in the middle of somewhere that probably be like hard to access, just because like, well, a lot of eyes would be on you. It's a safe in a tree that needs three specific keys, and those keys have to be turned at the same time too. So. And I also do think it's such an interesting thing when obviously cases that are, well, I refer to those cases, the jobs. I don't know. I'm used to that just because crime dramas in general, referring to things as cases. But the jobs always having, it's always that complicated thing when a job hits so close to home that you have to like you could tell Sophie initially kind of wanted Elliot kind of a little kind of further away from Kurtlander, because it's like, right, Elliot is the type of person that. Anyone on that team would go for blood if it was someone they cared about that was hurt. But also, like, Elliot's also severely capable of spilling blood in a multitude of ways with a multitude assortment of weaponry. Those you would think more traditional weaponry as well as non-traditional weaponry. So it's like, yeah, it's Elliot, so it's like you don't want him near Kurtlander. But yeah, going back to it, Kurtlander is trying to impress all the people at the Grove, because he's trying to brighten his star even more, make it so that he gets even more contracts and stuff like that. And he's trying to build his army more and more and more and more. Because the reason why he killed Paul was to cover his tracks about some stuff that happened in the past. They initially thought this was just about some soldiers that had worked with Kirtland who talked about like it was like a mine that people, like 35 people died in, and Kurtlander and Silverguard were like the security on tap for that, and it's like, right, they most likely were responsible for that. And so, but we also find out it's about the past, because Paul went along with this story, but it's like, right, Kurtlander spun this story about being such a great hero, and it turns out that he was didn't show courage in a situation, and a situation got his men killed. And because Paul went along with that story, because he thought, hey, the ends justify the mean, because it's like, right, he got his rise, whatever, but I got my clinic, I can help out other people, so he thought the good would outweigh it. But it's like, right, well, all that's happened in that time is Kurtlander's gotten stronger and stronger, and more people have been hurt and killed. And once again, Elliot's just upset because it's like, right, you could have told me. Because I think for Elliot, because for Paul, it was about shame is a reason why he couldn't admit it to Elliot, because he knows, like, Elliot's not a person about stolen valor. Like, that's probably one of the things that would probably piss Elliot off the most. And it's just like, right, going around pretending to be something you're not, like you're this, especially because it doesn't help. Once again, he's overcompensating, and Kurtlander is constantly telling the story over and over again. But for Elliot, I think it's this situation of, you made a mistake. You should have told me specifically about this. I probably could have helped you. I probably could have leaned you in doing the right thing. Because also I think it is that Elliot has done stuff in the past he's not proud of. There is something that him and Paul are talking about this episode that I don't... He was like, right, there was some... Like, it's about, right, not 100% leaving the past in the past, but kind of like fixing it. That is almost never too late. But Elliot's like, whatever's broken is so too late. And I'm like, I wonder what that's in reference to. Because at first I thought that might be talking about his dad, because I know him and his dad have a bad relationship. I'm wondering if that's going to be something that's covered this show. Because I want to say the last time Elliot's dad's situation was referenced was like, it was an episode he showed up at his... Was that this show or was that the original show? That was the original show, wasn't it? I don't think they covered it. I think that was the original show. I don't think that was the show about Elliot's dad. I thought it was like some correlation about that. I mean, it could be, but it might just be something that... It might be kind of like... It might not be on the same level, but it might be something similar to the Damian Monroe thing of like, yes, it's an ass... Everyone's got things in their past they're not proud of. Like, Damian Monroe was like one of the biggest things because Elliot even said, one of the worst things I ever did in my life was... Wow. And I think we did find out... I think he actually did finally talk about what that exact thing was. I think like in the final season, I think it came up. Either way. So I'm wondering if it's something of that ilk. Maybe it's not as bad as the Damian Monroe thing, but maybe it's similar in severity. I'm curious, like what it is that he's like, it's so broken, it can't be fixed. But even by the end, he's like, I'm at the very least willing to try, you know? I'm curious what that was about. I do love that Harry's the one that's kind of tagging along as Elliot and Paul are like knocking out all of Kurtlander's people. And I love that moment when he just like falls out the tree. I love that. And Paul's like, oh, nice moves. He's like, thank you. And he kind of looked at Elliot like, because he's like, hey guys, like, yeah, let me take out the nets, guys. You know, and it's like, oh, I thought you didn't like pain. It's like, yeah, just go ahead and tie those guys up, Harry. But later on getting grabbed by Kurtlander, which I love that when Sophie was caught, she was pretending like, oh, I'm part of the people, like, here kind of like that mess at the mines. Yeah, you kind of did a terrible job of cleaning house because, not only did you kill Paul, he was friends with Elliot Spencer, and then like, Kurtlander was almost like, I was like, and she's like, oh, by the fact that the blood's draining on your face, you know Elliot. I was like, that's one of my favorite things. It's when people go like, wait, Elliot Spencer? Like, people get scared when it's Elliot Spencer. I love that his name and reputation. He's such a legend that, like, Elliot's name precedes him. I mean, granted, I guess, like, most people don't know what he looks like. But the name carries so much weight. But Kurtlander, I guess, had heard the stories. But obviously, like, Harry pretending to be Elliot, I love doing the voice. It's just kind of like, I love he does like growl at one point and Sophie's looking at him like, what are you doing? He's like kind of struggling. So I don't know. It seemed like, I mean, what does Elliot do? He kind of grumbles and he just kind of, you know. I even love that he does the voice and everything. And I do love that the ninja, I was like, the fact that he took the ninja star from Paul's place, I was like, it's going to come into play. I thought he would have had an opportunity to throw it at someone, but it's like, no, he cut himself free with it. Either way, the whole situation of him using the quote that Elliot told him earlier at Paul's place about, right, and him being like, but instead he'd be like, oh, I smell a coward. He's like, oh, and Kurtlander's like, yeah, I might be a coward, but I have an army, so. But, and also, he ended up, quote, like, he was doing a whole, monologue thing, and I was like, what is that? That's gotta be a quote from something, isn't it? And it's like, and one of the guys was like, hey, isn't that from Rocky? I was like, oh, so, okay, so, yeah, okay. Once again, I've never seen the Rocky movies, but the quote seemed familiar. I've seen bits and pieces of Rocky movies, but not a full movie. So I was like, oh, that sounded familiar. And I was like, okay, that's why, because it's from a Rocky movie. I love it. But also Elliot doesn't appreciate, because that comes up from time to time when people kind of imitate him. He's like, "What was that voice?" And Harry's like, I was like, "I don't know what I don't know, just some voice. I don't know. Don't worry." I thought the general dude, that's kind of the main guy, because like his family's the one who started, like he's the descendant of the guy who, it was what, great grandfather or something like that, or great great grandfather, who started this whole thing back in the day during the Civil War. I thought like he was, because the way he was treating Sophie, like, hey, these are, you got to be more honorable. So when they were exposing him in front of the general, I was like, okay. And then the general was like, all right, fine, you're going to do what I say. And I was like, oh, you're not kind of well, you are, but you're kind of saying like, hey, like, you do what I say from now on. Now, first we're going to have to kill these people. I was like, oh, wow, so you're a dick too. But then I was like, well, that's the point. This place is the who's who of people getting together and just kind of like, oh, the typical people the leverage team goes after. Right. I was like, okay, interesting. I was like, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, right, these are bad people, so. But they exposed everything that, it wasn't to the general, it was to everyone else around, specifically Kurtlander's team, that they were trying to expose the truth to. About like, yeah, he doesn't care about them, he sees them as sacrificial lambs for him to get further in his own career and stuff like that. And so his men eventually quit. And I love because Parker got the win at the end of the day, because it was a whole thing between her and Sophie about who was going to get Kurtlander's phone, and she ended up getting Kurtlander's phone. It's like, right, I'm going to hot dogs in Detroit with Mayo, so let's buy the tickets or whatever. And then Sophie's like, with Mayo, I was like, hey, because she was almost like, oh, Mayo and hot dogs. Like, oh, but I was like, hey, Parker, I like Mayo and hot dogs too. I think it's something, I know my mom likes Mayo and hot dogs, so maybe that's something that I'd probably get from her. But that's not something I ever did until like much later in life. It's like in more recent years I've done that, but I do know my mom does it too. So part of me wonders, is that where that kind of comes from? It didn't hit me until later in life or something like that. I don't know. I feel like she didn't do that until later in life too, because I don't remember her ever, like growing up, I don't remember her ever putting mayo on her hot dogs. Either way, tangents and all that aside. I didn't talk about it much, but I do also love that this all ties into Brianna's situation of like, yeah, she's trying to just be in a nearby place to access the Wi-Fi. Well, it turns out the lady Maureen who works there is kind of trying to protect this very endangered frog, because she's like, basically this frog's death is kind of like this extinction of this particular frog is kind of like a major deal that no one's talking about. It's like a very like specific, it's like a Mississippi something, was it Mississippi gopher frog, I think is what it's called. And Brianna actually really gets into it. She's like, oh wow, like this thing's like immunity system can actually really help with a lot of bacterial infections. And I would say I love that. It's like, oh, like, Maureen's, can you help me put up flyers? And Brianna's like, what's a flyer? And it's like, come on. Like, I was like, well, I guess it's like, it is the digital age, so like, I guess like putting stuff on paper is so blasé now or something like that. So I guess it's like, you wouldn't think about printing that out, because it's like, yeah, because I mean, especially because like the real estate of the internet would make it so much easier to put what you're looking for like out there. I mean, that's why it's like, hey, I was able to bring your flyers into the digital age and was able to attract a lot more people to this cause by using the internet. So a lot of people are rallying behind this. And so how that ultimately ends up playing out is because Orpheus Grove is actually grown on top of like the habitat of this place. And then it turns out that these guys gathering all the time and pissing on, they're like pissing all over the place. They're pissing on the eggs of these frogs. That's why these frogs are dying. So now there's a junction to get this place turned into, eventually, I think by the end of the episode, Brianna's like, yeah, it's getting turned into, kind of a safe place to kind of let those creatures kind of thrive again and stuff like that. So that kind of all worked out in the end. The general got in trouble for all that, and everything Kurtlander was a part of ended up getting exposed because everyone was able to hear everything over the radio, including police. So he's arrested for all that stuff. I love that he's like, I'm a hero. I had the silver star, and they ended on the most, obviously for effect of like ending on the most like freeze frame with just his like the tears in his eyes and his face squinted like that, just being like kind of whining like a baby to some extent. So it's like, yeah, So Kurt Lander's reputation was destroyed, and they ended up stealing the phones of a lot of powerful people at that facility. So it's like, cool, we're going to have a lot of fun taking them all down too. So Paul plans on testifying against Kurt Lander about, the cover up and the fake story that they told. But also, he's also getting back to the clinic, and once again, Elliot saying at the end, like, hey, I'm going to try to fix what I believe wasn't fixable. Now the question then becomes, because, Paul's like, hey, if you ever need a Latino medic, you know which guy to turn to. So I wonder if that's going to be set up for like something later on, maybe this season or just in the future, where they do, because obviously they've had like their team ups where they've called in people that they've met over the course of the series or whatever, or connections they've had. We've seen that. Like the season 4 finale was an example of that, of like, yeah, let's bring in like other people kind of in this similar field of ours that we know and we have connection to, that type of thing. So I could definitely see something like that happening. And maybe Paul kind of showing up in that regard. Very excited to ultimately see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.